My name is Michael, and I'm the Inside Communications Director for Human Standpoint. The contents of this episode include strong language and graphic descriptions of violent crimes that may include sexual assault. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to the Prison Podcast. I'm Diane, Kahn, your host, and we're thrilled to have you with us. Today, we're diving back into the powerful narratives of those who have participated in victim-offender dialogues. These stories offer a unique glimpse into the profound experiences of individuals who have engaged in this transformative process. Today, you'll meet Jane Piper. I hope you'll fall in love with her candor like I have. Jane has an extraordinary gift of capturing even the smallest details, making you feel as though you're right there with her as she shares her story. In this episode, Jane will be opening up about her experience as a rape survivor, offering a powerful perspective on living through a sexual assault and her journey of healing and resilience. Next week, you'll hear from her surrogate offender, Chris. A surrogate pair involves two individuals connected by similar offenses, though not directly with each other. Jane's story is a testament to the strength and courage it takes to move forward, and I'm honored to share it with you today. But before we dive into Jane's story, I know you already heard Michael's disclaimer for this podcast a second ago, but I wanted to reiterate this episode may be triggering to many listeners, especially if you are a survivor of sexual assault or of sexual trauma of any kind. So if you need to take a break or skip this episode altogether, we encourage you to do so. We'll be here when you come back. Okay, just one more thing. Due to extenuating circumstances, we did this interview over the phone, so the audio quality is not the best, but we hope you can move past that. It just might require a little more focus than usual. Let's get into our story. Here's Jane.
Well, my name's Jane Piper. I live in Canada. I live in London, Ontario, Canada, which is sort of halfway between Detroit and Toronto. I used to live in Los Angeles. I was an actor and stand-up comic pursuing my dreams in the Hollywood industry, and was living in Los Angeles doing that. I also worked as a personal assistant to a TV producer, so that was my day job, and that's where my story starts. Really, is working at that job as a personal assistant, running errands for my boss. On one particular day, it was August 21st of 2003, almost 20 years ago, and I was running through the Ralph's grocery store in Brentwood, California, doing some grocery shopping before I zipped over to pick up the kids, to pick them up from their day camp and take them to a tennis lesson.
She was putting the groceries into the back of a car, a huge Suburban with multiple rows of seats. After closing the back, she walked around the car to get into the driver's seat. She got in and was arranging her things in the center console.
And so then I turned around to close the door to go on my way, but there was a man standing in the door. And he had what looked to me like a knife held against my side. And he immediately slammed the door shut with him inside my car and locked the doors. And we were just sitting there squashed in the driver's seat. And I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I started to cry. And he said, "I need you to drive me to Santa Monica." And I was, sort of trying to process that everything. It's your brain just goes in every direction when something like this happens. I just remember the confusion of it all. And then he told me to get in the back seat. And this didn't make any sense, of course, because I didn't know how I was going to drive when I'm in the back seat. But I went to get out of the car to get in the back seat, and he yelled at me to climb through the back instead. And he pushed me through the back, through the seats. And he pushed me into the back seat, and then there's another row of seats behind that, and he told me to get in the further back seat, and he started to climb in after me. And I remember asking him, I don't understand. How am I supposed to drive you to Santa Monica when I'm in the back seat of the car? And he told me to take my clothes off. And that's when I realized what was happening. And I had a moment of feeling very stupid, like I could have gotten out of this, and just realizing that it was, somehow something that I could have avoided.
One of the questions survivors of sexual assault are often asked is, why didn't you fight back? But Jane did fight back. She was overpowered by her attacker. This highlights a crucial point. Even when survivors make every effort to resist, they can still be subjected to violence due to the aggressor's strength or other factors beyond their control. Here's Jane again.
I immediately knew what he was going to do, and I jumped back into the seat where he was and started fighting with him, and I managed to get what I thought was a knife. It was a corkscrew, and I got that out of his hand. And because I'm not a violent person, I didn't know what to do with it. I was hitting him with it, but I was very aware in the moment that I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted to defend myself and get away from the situation, but I still was very sensitive about hurting this person, even though he was clearly going to hurt me. I don't understand why I did that, but that's something that I battle with. But I hit him with it. He got very angry about the possibility, I guess, that I could have hurt him. And he just beat me quite severely. He threw me over the back seat, and my back hit and hit on the back of the seat as I flew over. And then my neck knocked into this. There are these bins on the sides of the windows where the kids keep their toys and such. And my neck hit the edge of the bin, and then my head just kept going inside of it, and there was a loud crack.
The crack was the sound of two discs in her neck rupturing and the surrounding bones fracturing. Jane didn't realize the full extent of the damage until about 4 years later, when she discovered that the pieces of bone floating around inside her neck were slowly ripping apart at her spinal cord.
And we were just fighting, and I remember being very hot. It was an August afternoon. It was a very hot day in LA. And I remember at one point I was punched quite hard in the face. I think my lip split. And I remember my head turning with the punch. And this is a bit graphic, I apologize, but I just saw my blood flying through the air. It's just important to me because this moment of seeing my own blood flying and landing on the car seat, it was a moment of the survivor in me being awakened in a sense. And I realized that I had to comply with what this man was trying to do in order to survive and try and escape. So I basically gave in and stopped defending myself, and he continued to beat me, and he raped me. And it was quite a horrible experience. And then when he was finished, I think the reality that we were sitting in a public parking lot in broad daylight in Brentwood, California, and he said, "I'm going to take you for a ride." And I realized at that point that if I didn't get out of the car and if I went with him, that I might not survive. And I was able at this point, because he finally was getting back into the front seat, I could get into the middle seat again, and he couldn't hold me anymore. And I just started pressing buttons on the door. And it was very strange. I remember it being like a child, like an infant, who when they're learning how to play with dexterity toys and they're learning how to press buttons, I was like, I didn't understand how the door worked. I knew I had to get it. I knew I had to press a button to do something, but I just remember pressing randomly.
Jane jumped out of the window as her attacker was backing out of the parking spot. She ran into the grocery store, bloody and bruised. Customers at the checkout line stared at her, saying nothing. She was screaming that she'd been raped in the parking lot and begged them to call the police.
It was a horrifying, I was so badly beaten up. I was in such a bad place. I was so scared. I was hysterical. I just needed help, and I got it. There were two phones in the information desk area, and I kept picking up the phone trying to make a call while he was calling the police. But somehow the lines were connected, and he's like, no, don't use that phone. And so I started asking people, does someone have a phone I can borrow? Does someone have a phone I can borrow? And people just looked at me. They wouldn't do anything. No one helped me. They just looked at me like I was a strange person. And I remember just sort of like collapsing to the ground, sitting on the floor in this information desk area. And then a manager came at one point and she took me upstairs. And she was very helpful.
When the police arrived, they transported her to UCLA, where there's a specialized rape treatment center. This was, in many respects, a lucky break. Typically, rape survivors are taken to the general emergency room, where they're asked to repeat what happened to a slew of nurses and doctors, often in front of other patients. This situation can be extremely traumatic.
I didn't have to deal with any of that. I was quite lucky. My boyfriend, who I was with at the time, he was called and he came in. He didn't even recognize me because I was just so badly bruised. And well, I guess I wasn't bruised at that point, but just, I was pretty unrecognizable when I looked in the mirror. It was horrifying. I'll tell you this is an interesting experience. Like I said at the beginning, I was a stand-up comic at the time, and I have a pretty weird sense of humor. And I was really badly beaten, right? So what they had me do was carry a sheet around because my hair was falling out in clumps, and the whole process of being at the rape treatment center is basically collecting evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm carrying this sheet around to catch my hair as it falls out in case his DNA was there, and they wanted to collect as much evidence as they could. And I'm carrying this sheet with my hair falling out, and they had me do a jaw x-ray. And I went into this x-ray room, and the x-ray tech said, okay, we'll put the sheet on that chair there. And then we went about doing the jaw x-ray, and my boyfriend was in the room with me at the time. And then a nurse walked in the room. And the nurse just made a beeline to the chair with the sheet, and she picks up the sheet, and we're all just looking at the sheet kind of floating through the air, looking at what's happening. And there was just gasp and then silence. And then I started laughing. I said, well, that's why O.J. Simpson's still walking the streets. And I kept on laughing. And no one else laughed. It was just this really awkward moment. My boyfriend shushed me, I think, which is, it's like I shouldn't be shushed when this has just happened to me. But and then I started apologizing, which is what I always do for my humor. But but the nurse was a bit confused. She didn't know and I guess it was all explained to her, because what happened is a few hours later, the nurses there were a whole bunch of them all doing the rape kit, which is this very invasive process where they take photographs of every inch of your body and document every bruise and mark. And, they're taking pictures of parts of my body I don't want photographed. And all of a sudden the nurse starts laughing. And then she giggles to herself and she says, that's why O.J. Simpson's still walking the streets. And she starts giggling away. And then she explains the whole thing to the other nurses. And they laughed. And they got it. And I felt so good in that moment. And I don't know if the nurse did it intentionally, because it was such an awkward, horrible thing getting a rape kit done. But they got me. And in that moment, my humor sort of saved me. And I felt like I was going to be okay. And it's such a strange thing to make a joke in that moment, to have done what I did. But that's what I do. That's who I am. I can't help myself. And to know that I was going to be okay at that moment. Now, sure, there were lots of moments of not being okay after that. For years, it was just, you sort of have, you take a few steps forward, and then you take a few steps back, and it's like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 4 steps back. And it's just this, sort of roller coaster of healing.
Humor has been a crucial coping mechanism for Jane, helping her navigate the immediate aftermath of the attack and the long-term challenges. While she found that comedy could serve as a defense mechanism to shield herself from emotional pain and to connect with others, it didn't fully address every aspect of her healing journey. One significant challenge she faced was the overwhelming effort to find the person who attacked her. The process of working with law enforcement, attending court hearings, and dealing with the uncertainty of not knowing when or if the perpetrator would be found was emotionally taxing. She was also left wondering if he would find her again.
I was pretty vigilant at first about watching the news and, seeing other, there would be a story in Beverly Hills of someone who was attacked and they would show a sketch. And I said, and I would call the Beverly Hills Police Department and say, you should speak to the people in Santa Monica. He looks like the person that attacked me. And I was vigilant at first, but I just didn't get anywhere. And I realized that the police departments don't talk to each other. The police departments don't talk to each other. And that was very frustrating for me to find out. And there was a lot of frustration in discovering the justice system in different ways through the years. But basically, I didn't think of him at all. I remember my friend once saying to me, I hope they catch that monster. And I just thought it was so strange because I didn't think of him like that. When he was caught is when I first started thinking about him. It was 9 years later, and he was caught, and that's when all of a sudden I realized that he was a human being, and that I was attacked by another human being. And of course, I knew this all along, but I was focusing on my own healing. I really always what I discovered is that I really had kind of looked at my experience in the same way that someone who experiences a hurricane or an earthquake and experiences trauma from that, that they don't hold on to feelings towards the destructive force. They just deal with the aftermath. So this destructive force, in a sense, all of a sudden became a human being to me when he was caught. And I wanted to know who he was. And I wanted to understand who he was and what made him do what he did to me. I wanted to understand why. Why me? Why did you do this? Why did you wake up on that day and choose to be violent? Why are you that way? Why did you end up that way? What happened to you in your life that caused this? There were just so many things that I wanted to know. And I hadn't really thought about it until he was caught. And then in the 2 years that it took the justice system to process, essentially, process the case. So I had a preliminary hearing, but he ended up pleading guilty. So I didn't go to trial. He didn't go to trial, which was lucky. I didn't really want to go through that process, but I was ready for it.
Many women find the court process to be re-traumatizing. Luckily, since the man who raped her pleaded guilty, the only thing she could appear at, even though she didn't need to, was a sentencing hearing.
I was brought out to LA to speak at his sentencing hearing, and my friend Karen, who was a publicist for many years, I spoke to her, and she's also a rape survivor and had gone public with her story. Meeting her actually changed my life when I was going through the healing process, because when I met her, I was able to talk about the process of being raped openly without filters, without worrying about people being scared and having to protect other people. It's a whole other story, learning how to talk about the experience. But Karen was a publicist, and I was wanting to go be open about what had happened to me. We wanted to invite the press to the sentencing hearing, and that's what she did. She basically created a press release and said this woman was raped, and she's willing to speak out about it.
Jane was frustrated by the way rape was reported on and covered or not covered in the media.
For me, it was just, I wanted to say, this happened to me and I'm going to be okay. And I'm okay talking about rape. I'm okay saying I was raped. I'm okay using my name, showing my face. I just wanted to give a voice to the experience and put a face on the experience, because I was so frustrated through the years about hearing rape in the news. The media covers rape constantly, and all these stories about celebrities or athletes or, college kids, high school guys. There's so many stories about rape in the news, but we never hear from rape survivors, or very rarely anyway. And I just wanted to change that. So I invited the media to the courtroom, and I spoke for about half an hour, basically telling him all the impact of what he had done to me.
But then Jade did something that many people did not expect.
I chose to forgive him. I wasn't sure if it would happen or not. I had thought about it ahead of time. I knew I wanted to forgive him because for me it was important to let go of the toxic feelings that connected us, that I had developed essentially through the 2 years of being in the justice system, and then whatever was left over from just the experience itself of being raped. I just didn't want to be connected to him anymore. I wanted to let go of what I felt, and I chose to forgive him. And because of that, the videos that's what they showed in the videos with the TV cameras and the radio and all the media people that were there. They went viral.
From this point, Jane sought the opportunity to confront the man who raped her, hoping to ask him questions directly and gain some sort of closure. However, his defense attorney advised him not to respond to her request, leaving Jane without the answers. Undeterred, she pursued the victim-offender dialogue. Despite her efforts, this path was ultimately thwarted.
That unfortunately did not go too far because the man who harmed me was not ready to be accountable. He had a brain injury at some point in the years after he raped me, and he said that he didn't remember a lot. I always thought that was untrue because he said things during the preliminary hearing, and even I have been told he speaks of certain things, which I don't understand how he would remember if he doesn't remember what he had done. So I thought there was still a good chance to talk to him. If I just went in there without any judgment and just said, listen, I just want to know. But he ended up speaking to me a little inappropriately in the letters. For the process starts, the victim offender process starts by writing him a letter.
Then Jane was asked to consider if she'd be interested in doing a surrogate VOD.
I would share my story in a circle with a group of men who are incarcerated for violent crimes. And then someone who had done something similar to what was done to me would share their story. And then we would ask each other questions back and forth and chat back and forth. And we would open it up to the circle, and everyone else would be able to ask questions and talk back and forth. And so I immediately agreed to that. I was very gung-ho. That was probably, I keep talking about things changing my life, but that was another game changer that day. I went into the prison and I realized that day that this is what I was meant to be doing, that sharing my story in prison and talking to men who have already been violent and sharing my story of violence and the impact of the crime in order to help them heal and to help myself heal at the same time. That's what I meant to do. And it was an incredibly healing day.
Some might argue that a surrogate VOD could be less impactful compared to meeting directly with the person who committed the crime against Jane, as it might seem less personal or immediate. Jane believes otherwise. She feels that even though Christopher was not the man who harmed her, their shared experiences and the opportunity for dialogue provided her with valuable insights and a form of closure.
For me, it didn't even have to be with the man who harmed me. I was able to get healing talking to people who did not harm me, who had just done similar things. I've been honored to have spoken with several different men, particularly Christopher, who I met when I did the surrogate VOD, who helped me incredibly because he was the very first person that I ever spoke to who was able to just be accountable and tell me what he had done, tell me, to the best of his ability why he did it, and what led him in through his life, leading up to a life of violence, leaving that violence behind now, and turning over a new leaf and starting over, committed to nonviolence. It's so incredibly healing for me anyway, to hear that, because it's the why is so important to me. And the humanity is incredibly important. To be able to see someone as a human being and without judgment, to fully understand that we all have struggles, we all do things that can harm other people. Just some people do worse, much worse. But I harmed people as well. Maybe it was just emotionally, or on a very minor level. When I was going through my worst years in Los Angeles, I hurt all of my friends. I hurt everyone in my life. I did so many horrible things that I still feel like I need to make amends for. And I think it's so incredibly helpful to be able to ask the questions. And for me, not having the connection to Christopher didn't harm me. So I'm just meeting him as a person. And I was able to ask so many different questions about why he had done what he did, and why he thought he had gotten to a place in his life where he was causing violence. And it was just incredibly therapeutic to be able to hear these answers and to talk to someone who is so open, because people aren't open about where they're at. Even in everyday life, people are in denial of why they do things and why they don't do things,
Mm-hmm.
And to go into prison and to talk to people who are doing the accountability work that needs to be done. They're facing their shame of what they experienced as young people, facing the shame of what they experienced causing violence, experiencing violence, causing it. It's, it hurt people, they always say.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, it really is true.
As you can probably tell at this point, Jane is an incredible woman. She gave us so much insight into her life and her experiences during our interview. I asked if she had any advice or suggestions for our listeners. Here's what she said.
I think the most important thing for me is sharing stories. I think it's really important to talk about what your life experience is, and that if it involves trauma, that it's still okay to talk about it. Mm-hmm. That sometimes things happen, and even that we have shame with it. Now, for me, I didn't feel shame about what happened to me. I don't know why. I'm very lucky, I think. I share my story so that other people can learn from it without experiencing it. Mm-hmm. I don't want other people to have to go through what I experienced. We can learn about violence and then end violence without everybody having to experience it first. Mm-hmm. By sharing stories, we can learn and change. The violence I experienced, there were just two people there. There was the man that hurt me, and there was me. So I always thought that the only other person that could answer questions for me would be him, because no one else was there. What I learned through these examples of surrogacy that I've encountered, if that's even the right word, surrogacy, this reciprocal healing, this mutual healing that takes place during dialogue, is that other people can have had similar experiences and can fill in the gap of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So that someone who has had a violent experience themselves can actually help me a lot by explaining why they did it, who they were, what they were doing, what they were thinking, what led up to it. There's so much that I just feel like there's this wholeness that I've experienced because of having these conversations with other people. And it's not even with the person who harmed me. Mm-hmm. I'm getting healing from other people's stories because it fills in the gaps of my own.
To close out this episode, I just want to take a moment to reflect on Jane's incredible journey. Hearing her share such raw and profound insights into her experience was both heart-wrenching and enlightening. Her story isn't just about survival. It shows that healing involves recognizing the shared humanity in both survivors and perpetrators. Her realization that her attacker was a human being too, not just a monster, highlights the complex nature of human behavior and the importance of understanding all perspectives in the healing process. Jane's experience teaches us so much about the nature of trauma and recovery. When she spoke about the moment she realized her attacker was just another human being, it was a powerful reminder that beneath the layers of pain and anger, there are people who grapple with their own struggles and histories. This understanding doesn't excuse the harm done, but it opens up pathways for deeper empathy and dialogue. If you or someone you know is interested in participating in a victim offender dialogue, reach out to your local Department of Corrections. If these services are not available to you, consider advocating for them through your local representative. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Prison Podcast. In the next episode, we're hearing from Jane's surrogate offender, Christopher, who served 25 years in a number of California prisons. His episode tackles a difficult and sensitive topic, a crime against a child. Through years of self-reflection and personal growth, Christopher's story provides a profound exploration of human resilience and healing. We'll see you next week. Meanwhile, be kind to yourself.